Brad, your last few books, almost all of them have come true now. The things that you were warning about are here. You were just with us in Salt Lake, and I can't thank you enough, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to see you. But you were here just this last week. Here we are sitting in the town where the NSA container unit is, the world's largest collection facility, and nobody seems to really even care. Nobody seems to care. It is confounding.
Well, listen, last summer, this time, you and I were talking about my thriller Blacklist, which was all about the total surveillance state that we're now living under and what the NSA is doing. And, the happiest people in this is the Department of Homeland Security, because everybody's focused on NSA, and it's only the tip of the iceberg, what's been uncovered so far. So, last summer I said, this is the next big thing we're going to be talking about is the NSA. And sure enough, here we are. And I really believe the next thing we're going to be talking about is what's in Hidden Order. I think it's the next thing coming down the pike.
And what is that? What do you discuss in the book?
Listen to this. Listen to this.
You want me to say it, or you want to tell it, Bud?
I just want to read what's on the book. The most secretive organization in America operates without any accountability to the American people, hiding in the shadows, pretending to be part of the United States government, power beyond measure. That's all absolutely happening. We have that verified from the Washington Post when they were talking about the secret tribunals, the secret courts that are underneath the Capitol, underneath the visitor center, the new visitor center. We now know why it costs so much money, because there's a lot of infrastructure underneath
what was it, $600 million?
Yeah, and they said they said that the Washington Post just ran a story, said that there are secret courts underneath that are operating outside the Constitution, and they are delivering Supreme Court style decisions on the rights of Americans that none of us even know about.
It's out of control. It is absolutely out of control. This stuff is unfurling in the public faster than I, as a thriller writer, almost can get it out there.
Yeah.
So for me, with the idea with Hidden Order was 9/11, I got trapped on the East Coast, and my wife and I ended up spending our vacation. We couldn't get overseas where we were going. We spent our vacation on a little island off the coast of Georgia, and I learned about an organization there more powerful, some people say, than the actual federal government itself. It's hiding kind of under the eaves of the federal government, more secretive than the CIA, more secretive than the NSA, and it affects all of us daily. And I said, at some point I'm going to write this as a thriller, but I wasn't ready yet. Just like last summer I knew NSA was the big thing. After I got that book out in the marketplace, I said, I need to write the new book, Hidden Order, because that's the next big thing we'll be talking about in the public square.
So explain what the Hidden Order is.
Okay, what Hidden Order is about, this is... I learned about a group of powerful people that snuck out of New York one night in November in the early 1900s, went down to an island called Jekyll Island, and there they cobbled together. This is thriller writer gold. It's like out of a spy novel, how they went down there and what they did. They cobbled together a plan for a central bank for the United States of America. And they said, what is going to be the name of this? Because nobody wants a central bank. There had been two before that had been killed. They said, how are we going to do this time so we can pull this off, these private guys? They said, let's call it federal, and let's use the word reserve. It won't have anything to do with the Fed being the government, but let's call it the Federal Reserve. And then they went on to create such an elaborate smokescreen to keep Americans in the dark about what they were really going to do with this organization. And as a thriller writer, I said,
they had just so everybody knows the history. They had just the only thing, if I'm not mistaken, that they had changed is the name. They had just been voted down by the Congress. The American people were absolutely against it. And when they went down to Jekyll Island, I believe one of the only things they really changed in that bill, if I'm not mistaken, Brad, you probably know better than I do at this point, was the name Federal Reserve.
It's amazing because these guys are about as federal as Federal Express, and there's no reserves there.
Right.
Glenn, it is, you know me, and you do the same thing with your fiction. We're doing faction, where you can't tell where the facts end and the fiction begins. This is supposed to be a heart-pumping beach read. But if you finish the book and close it, and you're smarter for having read Hidden Order, which I think people will be, especially with the content of this book, then that's icing on the cake for me as a thriller author.
Okay, so you are saying that the Federal Reserve is the Hidden Order, and what are they doing?
In this book, the Federal Reserve Chairman leaves office very quickly under very bad circumstances. There are 5 people in hidden order who are put up to replace him. They all disappear on the same night. So my character, Navy SEAL Scott Harvath, who's been doing work for the government on the side, gets called in to try to figure out not only where these people are, but why were they taken? Is somebody trying to blackmail the Federal Reserve? And as he starts peeling this apart, he finds out that the Federal Reserve is doing something nobody in America could ever imagine would be done. They are financing operations out the back door. And I think all of this kind of stuff is going to actually in real life come to light very soon, particularly because, and by the way, the Federal Reserve loves the NSA scandal. They love the IRS scandal because guess who's 100 years old this year and we're not talking about? The Federal Reserve. There is no mechanism in Washington to say, are these guys successful or not? And by the way, they're private and they are not accountable to any of the American people. And it's very, very interesting what they've been up to there. And I weave that into this thriller.
Can I ask you a question? I happen to have met Richard Fisher. He is, do you know who he is? Okay.
I'm not familiar with Richard Fisher.
He's the president and CEO of the Federal Reserve in Dallas. He took over in 2005. And I think he's one of us. He thinks Ben Bernanke is out of control. He thinks he has been on the record saying that, he's the one that's bucking the Federal Reserve. And he has been saying they're spending too much. They're out of control. They need to be reined in. This is craziness. I mean, when you read his writings, he reads, quite honestly, like you or me. Well, and he's in the Federal Reserve System. So how do you, and who's the other one?
The system is a con itself, Glenn. The only reason they don't care about those banks, the Federal Reserve banks that have been set into the regions across the country, they were just there to implement Fed policy and to make people feel they have local connection to the Federal Reserve. I talk about that in Hidden Order as well, that those things are just part of the window dressing. If I was that guy, I'd be starting my car with a stick, and I wouldn't drive it down any steep hills either. That kind of boat rocking is not going to last for long there. I'd be very frightened to be that man.
Wow.
Well, he's been there since 2005, and he's spoken out for a long, long time. He's spoken out for a long time. And I think he's a good guy. I've talked to him.
I don't doubt
he is.
I mean, Herman Cain. I mean, there have been good people that have gone through there, but understand that those offices exist, particularly to make people feel more comfortable. Listen, when the American people did not want the Federal Reserve. As a matter of fact, the previous 2 central banks had been killed because people hated them. The dollar is worth 96% less than when the Federal Reserve was created, the current one, 100 years ago. Nobody's talking about that.
Here's the thing that everybody needs to understand. My wife saw a gold coin, a new U.S. gold coin. They used to be $20 pieces. Now they're $50. And so if you buy a new gold coin, it says $50. And she said, "Why does this cost? What does this say $50?" And I said, "I think because of confiscation, they could say we're going to give you face value. That's a gold coin. It's face value $50." But it's the best way to understand inflation. Gold is the standard. And if you look at a $20 gold coin from 1920, that coin is worth about $1,500. You go in and buy the best suit that you can find. You go buy an Armani suit. It'll cost you about $1,500. In 1920, you would go in to buy the best suit that you could find. It would cost you $20. That's the best way to explain inflation, I think, and why gold should be the standard and what our Federal Reserve has done to our dollar. They have taken this $20 gold piece that now costs you $1,500, and they have gone off the rail with our dollars. Our dollars used to be worth, if our dollar was sound, our $20 bill would still buy you a good suit. And it doesn't, because they've screwed it all up with the Federal Reserve. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, listen, between 2000 and 2012, just in that decade, in that 10 years, eggs are up by 73%, coffee's up by 90%, peanut butter 40%. I could go on and on. Beer's up 25%, wine's up 60%, electricity 42%. That has to do with policy as well. But I mean, even gasoline, it's up 158%. This is all connected. So I don't write textbooks. My job is I'm an entertainer. I want them to buy my book instead of James Patterson or a Clancy or a Ludlum book. But
not mine. Definitely not mine.
Yours. You're not yours. By the way, my kids went by and they said, "Daddy, there's Mr. Beck's book. Why is it up so high on the shelf and not yours?" And I said, "Kids, that's what happens when you're an author with the last name that starts with the B. You get up at eye level. B is down at the ankle. Is Mr. Beck, are his books better than yours, Daddy?" No, kids.
No, it's just all alphabetical in the bookstore, kids.
That's right.
All alphabetical. So wait a minute. So in the book, and I haven't read it yet. I'm going on vacation, and I have it with me, and I'm going to read it because I love your books, Brad. I really love your books, and your books I learn so much from. You and Vince Flynn are just the best writers of our day, and we'll talk about Vince here in a second. But are in your book, are you going into what they're doing? Are you alleging that the Federal Reserve is the Star Chamber?
Yeah, I am, and I'm also. Here's what really drove me on this book. I found it fascinating. It was a little news story that went overlooked in a lot of places. When the Arab Spring, which I'm highly, highly suspicious of, when the Arab Spring went into Libya, one of the first things the rebels did. You know, we see these idiots with like sweat socks tied around their heads to be headbands, and they're going around shooting spray and pray with their machine guns. These guys, one of the first things they did before they even got rid of Gaddafi, they set up a central bank. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. Who's behind these guys, and who tells these rebels, you guys need a central bank, not just a bank or a bank account where you can get money, or here's where you meet the CIA guys with the bags full of cash to buy stuff you need, but you're going to put together a central bank. And the more I dug on this book, the more fascinating stuff I came up with. I think readers are not only going to have a great ride with this book, but they're going to close it being pretty smart about the Federal Reserve and some of the dangers it poses to the country.
So not just fictionally, you're saying that you do think that the Federal Reserve is an actual sort of Star Chamber for us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. Listen, they're not federal. That's the thing. They set out intending to confuse and mislead the American public. They're not accountable to the people. So I think there's a lot, and I've heard some pretty hair-raising stories, a couple of which I've put into the book, about things that are going on behind the scenes there. And that's why I think the next big scandal in real life is going to be the Federal Reserve.
Wow.
Well, I don't know if the Federal Reserve is ever going to let that out. I
guess I'm the guy that needs to start his car with a stick and not drive down.
Yeah, I mean,
hills then, right?
So what do you think of like the Bilderbergers and all of that stuff? Do you believe that's a? You
know what? Rich people have been getting together forever, trying to corner markets and help themselves out and scratch each other's backs. That doesn't surprise me. I've never seen and Glenn, you and I know some of the same people, and although I don't know all the people you know, but I've never had any of my guys. I've never had any of my my intelligence guys or my special operations guys come and say, "Wow, these Bilderbergs are a problem," and that kind of stuff. That said, I got to tell you, a few years ago, I wouldn't have written a book about the NSA and total surveillance because I was afraid I would have been afraid people would laugh me out of the publishing world. That what a crackpot, and I guess at this point nothing's going to surprise me.
So, but you're not saying that you believe it, and you're just afraid that people will laugh at you.
No. I don't believe it. I've never read any articles about the Bilderbergs or stuff like that that's ever made me think, wow, this is a big deal I need to be worried about.
Hey, Stu, do you remember what was the name of that author in England that wrote this book? And he started making fun of the Bilderbergs and all of these guys and the people that look into conspiracies. Do you remember that guy? We had him on the air. He's a lefty. And not a guy who you would suspect. And he went to the Grove, didn't he?
Yeah, he followed some conspiracy nut job to the Grove. Yeah,
what, to the Bohemian Grove?
Yeah.
And remember, but he wasn't a conspiracy nut job. He said, I hung out with conspiracy nut jobs, and I was going to make fun of them. He said, but as it turns out, some of this stuff is actually real.
Well, he was saying more that it was just really weird. I mean, he wasn't giving credence to their theories.
They stick one pinky in their left ear when they tinkle in the woods, and I've heard just dumb stuff. I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard anything that makes me think that they've got their hands on the levers of power. But
they do in the Federal Reserve. They do have their fingers on the lever of real power. They are the ones who walk into every president, every king, every palace, every dictator's tent, and they do walk in with clout. And, but the same could be said for Goldman Sachs.
Well, I mean, the vampire squid, as Goldman Sachs is referred to, absolutely. But what's interesting for me as a thriller writer when I look at the Fed is the one thing the Fed controls is monetary policy and the digitizing of money, okay, the dollar. So I looked at this and I said, is there anybody in the world who can exercise influence over the Fed, who could basically make the Fed their you-know-what, who will do whatever they want the Fed to do? And as I dug into that, I found some interesting things because the dollar is dependent on a few things in the global economy. And if any of those things get pulled, the dollar tanks and America collapses, and it's going to make World War Z look like the Von Trapp family.
All right, so let's go to that in here in just a second. I also want to talk to you about Vince Flynn and some other things. Brad Thor, the new book is called Hidden Order. We'll continue with him in just a second.